Welcome to MFT Theory Module 9. It's Chapter 9 in the book Family Therapy, the Structural Model, Salvador Minuchin. In your online classroom, there is a very lovely presentation of structural therapy. There's a PowerPoint that outlines the basic components, an overview of both of Minuchin's books, Structural Family Therapy Model with the leaders, concepts, assumptions, goals of therapy, roles, assessment, interventions, and change. Also quotes from the chapter from Minuchin's seminal work and sample script. So these things are there for you if you would like to review that and help you with any of the things that you are working on in this class. Bear in mind that Minuchin is a very important theorist in MFT theory, and that he is going to pop up on tests, on quizzes, in classes, in different work. So let's look at what structural therapy actually is. Most of his approaches are familiar. Each of the theorists modeled from Freud and from each other. Always family rules, roles, coalitions, subsystems, boundaries, wholeness, organizations for functionality and dysfunctionality. The structural outlook comes from the use of spatial and organizational metaphors. How can we describe the problem? How can we find a solution? It's very much an active theory. The therapist is very active, very directive. Based on the medical model, it's that the therapist is the expert on the family, to the point that during therapy he actually joins very intensely in the family system. Really good for working through problems. Not so good when therapy is over, because then the families become very dependent on the therapist to lead them, and he's moved on to a different family. So if you are looking to incorporate structural therapy from a pure standpoint, bear in mind there has to be significant weaning away and termination procedures. Some of the major determinants of the well-being of a family member: how whole is the family, or are they just shattered? What is the family's hierarchical organization? Who holds the power? How interdependent are the subsystems? Are the children functioning? Is the parent subsystem functioning? The spousal subsystem functioning? The individual members, are they functioning? Minuchin was born in Argentina. He's Hispanic, of European descent. He worked with Nathan Ackerman, not difficult to comprehend, they all did. He went to Israel for a period of time to work with displaced children, with the traumatized with the Holocaust, children that had lost their entire families, either from death or from being separated in ways after war-torn Europe where they could not come back together. He turned to a sociological analysis of social context. He is the first theorist that began to apply contextual thought to the family systems. It is culture, context, what does this mean to me, environmental, family relational, pulled together. He took on the directorship of the Philadelphia Child Guidance Center. I can tell you that is on the Marriage and Family exam. He recruited Jay Haley. Jay Haley might not even be with us for strategic therapy as a theory model had Minuchin not found him and taken him under his wing to do these things. Harry Aponte, there is a video of Harry Aponte doing classic structural family therapy in your online classroom, as well as Charles Fishman, who co-authored a book with Minuchin. And he began to look at psychosomatic families, families that showed anxiety, that had diabetes, anorexia, other kind of medical issues that were based in psychological dysfunction. He included that research to include children with asthma that he felt was based from anxiety. That's why asthma was included in the DSM-3 as a psychological disorder. Kind of upsetting to those of us who have asthma but do not have anxiety. But nevertheless, that was an outgrowth of Minuchin's work. He saw that families, very troubled families, had children manifesting severe psychosomatic symptoms. Menuchen is largely responsible as well for some of the somatoform diagnoses in DSM-4. A lot of these families were underorganized, they were chaotic, they were single parent led, they were below the poverty line, they were very enmeshed, they did not have clear boundaries, they did not have good communication skills. So, on page 216, Menuchen actually describes his theory in his own words, which I think is worth 216 listening to. In essence, the structural approach to families is based on the concept that a family is more in each individual or the biopsychodynamics of the members. Family members relate according to certain arrangements which govern their transactions. How do we get the business of the family done? These arrangements, though usually not explicitly stated or even recognized, form a whole. They form the structure of the family. The reality of the structure is a different order from the reality of the individual members. That's why you have family members, individuals who have certain memories, and other members of the family say, no, it didn't go that way at all. Structuralists pay special attention to family transactional patterns because they offer clues to the family structure. How permeable are the boundaries? Where are the alignments and coalitions? How do we maintain stability and change and homeostasis? How can the symptoms be reduced or extinguished according to this model? And according to Menuchen, they cannot be changed for the individual unless they're changed first within the system. So, he believed that a family structure represents the sum total of all the operational rules the family has evolved for carrying out its important functions, for doing the work of the family. How do we bring children into the family? How do we launch children outside of the family? How do we handle marital conflicts and sibling conflicts? How do we handle dating? How do we handle adolescence? How do we handle any of these things that we do? And there is a blueprint, good or bad, functional or dysfunctional, within each family. A family's transactional patterns, on page 217, regulate the behaviors of its members. It's either generic and universal, this is the way we do it all the time, or it's idiosyncratic, it's individualized to each member or to each specific situation. And that most well-functioning families, according to Menuchen, are hierarchically organized, with the parents having more authority and more power than the children. The older children having more power and privileges than the younger children. So in his model, unless there's a strong couple relationship, spousal relationship, a strong parental relationship, the family is going to degenerate if the children or the weaker members are involved. He also believed there's complementarity of functions, which is an important term on the MFT exam. The husband and wife have to be a team, an interdependent team. The degree to which the needs and abilities of both spouses can dovetail and the degree of reciprocity that can occur provides satisfaction and result in harmonious family function, family balance. So that he believed that we assign complementary roles and functions, the good child, the bad child. Kind of sad for the child that gets the bad child role. Tender mother, tough father. The mother is the nurturer, the father is the disciplinarian. Very patriarchal in his and paternalistic in his belief system, but that is where he came from. May not apply in every manner to the families that we see today, but aspects of his work can be taken out to apply. He defines subsystems on page 218 as interpersonal boundaries and rules for membership. If I'm in a subsystem, am I a child? Am I a sibling? Am I a mother? Am I a wife? Which subsystem do I belong to? And what are my rules, responsibilities, roles around that? The spousal, parental, and sibling subsystems are the most prominent, the most important. The strength and durability of the spousal system offers the key to family stability. The arrival of children causes a family then to have a parental subsystem. New responsibilities. How are we going to raise these children? How are we going to take care of them? The sibling subsystem. How are we going to learn to support, cooperate, protect, and get along with each other? Boundary permeability. How flexible and how clear are our boundaries? And they vary in their flexibility. Who will we let in? Who will we keep out? Except excessively rigid and flexible boundaries are impermeable. Children don't have the opportunity to watch. This thought goes across, it's trans-theoretical, it goes across many theories. Diffuse boundaries, where it's blurred and indistinct and we don't really know, sometimes leads to abuse, with children being molested, or older children bullying younger children, or people coming in and out of the home that should not necessarily live there. And a well-functioning boundaries, a well-functioning family, clear boundaries give a member a sense of I belong to myself, individuation, within us, a connectedness to the family. I can retain my individuality without losing my sense of belongingness. Very much harking back to Maslow. Somewhere in between the continuum is enmeshment with very diffuse boundaries, and we are all too much involved, very much like the script that we had where the mother-child boundary takes precedence over the couple or the spousal system. And disengagement, rigid boundaries. It's just me out here alone, and we're not part of a family at all. Enmeshment refers to an extreme form of closeness and intensity in family interactions, where we're over-concerned, over-involved in each other's lives. Too high value on family cohesiveness. And if you look back into family systems with the Beavers model and the circumplex model, they assess for engagement and distancing, enmeshment and disengagement. Those things become a little clearer if you look at it out from the lens of structural therapy. Alignments. Who do I join? Who is my friend in this family? Who do I fight with? Power. Who has the decision making? Who carries the balance of power? Who makes the money? Who makes the choices for us?
So money is part of that.
Money is definitely part of that. It's why families didn't get divorced in the 50s and 60s, 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s and 70s, because when the father left, the money left. You know, whoever, what is the old term? I pay the cost to be the boss, right? Your father makes the money, puts food on our table and a roof over our head. Those things have changed dramatically in the 90s and into the millennium.
Well, egalitarianism is the new paradigm of
Yes.
intimate relationships.
Yes, but wouldn't fit so well here, because then who would Mnuchin unbalance? Yes. Aponte, if you have a chance to look at any Harry Aponte's work on the class, it's well worth looking at as he works with the family. He's also Hispanic and deals with family members from that kind of hierarchical, patriarchal view, and understands where they're coming from. Power is seldom absolute, it is more contextual, situational. A person can have extreme power in their home and have no power socially. No real power economically. And sometimes the lower socioeconomic levels, where there is no power for that particular adult outside of the home, extreme power is exacted within the home.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes. Certain alignments are considered by structuralists to be dysfunctional. Mnuchin calls triangulation. Each parent demands that the child ally with them against the other parent. When that happens, there are going to be considerable problems, because there's not a balance within the family, and there's not a maintaining of the right type of systems. One, not only economic senses of entitlement to power, sometimes their faith system sense of entitlement and power based on certain belief systems, particularly for males. If I'm male, by definition, I have the power. So, and you have to remember with families that you see that are problematic, if you have a subsystem where the mother and the son, or the mother-daughter, father and daughter, father-son, are allying against the other parent, whether they're staying married or they're divorcing, what happens then to the parental relationship between the child that's allied against their own parent? being disrupted, it's being destroyed for all the wrong reasons. And we're there to attempt to disrupt that if possible. Coalitions. A stable coalition is fixed and inflexible, an inflexible union. You're my child, I will love you forever. It's fixed. A deterring coalition is when there's a third member, the pair are holding a third family member responsible. So we're having problems in our relationship, it's because of this bad child we have. What happens when the bad child is removed from the home? A second child is given that designation. What happens when all children are moved from that home? We're staying together for the children. So it doesn't hold long term. Clearly define generational boundaries so that parents form a subsystem power with shared executive power. Not abuse of power, but power. Alignment between the parents on key issues like money, faith, discipline. Rules related to power and authority. What's going to happen if we disagree? How will we agree if we can't agree? Excuse me. Family dysfunction with Rosenberg. He summarizes the structural position because he says that when a family runs into a difficulty, we can assume that it's operating within a dysfunctional structure. Not always true. Families have problems that are not always dysfunctional. Problems come. It's how we handle those problems. And even if the way they handle problems is to seek counseling, that doesn't make a family dysfunctional. It makes a family who's experiencing problems say, we need some help outside of ourselves. So everything that you read through this, read through the lens of when it was developed and what the social context and structure was at the time. A dysfunctional family, by definition, according to Colapinto, is that they fail to fulfill the purpose of the nurturing of the growth of their members. That may be more true. And sometimes families see themselves falling apart, and they will actually destroy and attack each other from the inside out. If you see families who have very rigidly held beliefs around faith, around sexual orientation, around education, around whatever, where this belief system becomes more important than the connection of the family to each of the members, you will see that if one person falls out of that rigidly held set of expectations, that person is very often removed. If one member of the family is removed, destroyed, the whole family suffers. The family cannot be healthy with members totally disengaged. And so Mnuchin reserves the label of pathological for families who, when faced with stressful situations, instead of adapting to what they're facing, they increase the rigidity of the transactional patterns. This isn't work, we're going to tighten the screws down harder. And we're going to make you fit into this role. We're going to tighten the boundaries. We're not going to explore alternatives. Normal families, or more normalized families, which is a better term, adapt to the issues that come with life while they still try to hold on and preserve the family continuity of all members. So, and sometimes the family has to be restructured for that to happen. Therapeutic goals, geared to the present, geared to changing negative problematic structures to more adaptive structures. The principle of action preceding understanding. New experiences, insight, understanding leading to rearrange structures.
Action before understanding is, correct me if I'm wrong, different from all the other chapters, all the other approaches so far.
I think of it more as fake it till you make it. And Haley bounces off of that with his prescriptive directives. So, okay, can you today, for whatever reason, put the fight down and agree to get along? You don't have to agree to agree. But can we put the fight down and go along? Can we do it, if we can't do it a day, can we do an hour? Where they're practicing a new structure. And the mentality is that if you can put it in place and practice it, it can become real.
Okay, it sounded a little more derogatory, like ape it until you make it.
I think it's fake it until you make it. If you've never tried that communication pattern and all you know is negative, they're just saying if you will model it, because we do, what we say and how we behave and what we think does change our behavior, you know, over time. So he believes in joining and accommodating as therapeutic techniques, assessing family interactions, monitoring dysfunctional sets, and then restructuring. He describes himself acting like a distant relative, coming in and joining the family and respectfully accommodating its style. He wants to feel the pain of those that are scapegoated or excluded. He wants to feel the power of those that make the decisions. Mimesis, which is Greek for copying or mirroring, he begins to imitate the manner, style, range, very much mirroring who he thinks might be in power or mirroring the behaviors of who he thinks holds the least power in the family. He will change. I've seen videos. We're looking for some where the family comes in and sits in certain seats, and he gets them all up and has them move. No, I need you over here. And you get right close to him, and by the time that there's so much chaos while he's moving them all around, and then he decides who he's going to sit with for that session. And wherever he sits is where the balance of power is held. And it changes from session to session, sometimes during session. And because he set himself up as the active, directive, expert leader of the family, where he sits, if the theory is working well in process with his family, that becomes reality for them, at least for that session, for an hour. So he affiliates, he confirms their statements, he will do some make some very surprising statements, like to a child, you seem to be quite childish. How do your parents keep you so young? You seem to be very, very dependent on your spouse, not able to make decisions for yourself. Hoping that the person would say, well, of course I'm a child. I act childish, I'm a child. I'm 6 years old. Or the mother would say, he's acting appropriately for a 6-year-old child. Okay then, let's start there.
Sorry.
Yes.
Clinical.
In a sense. Or, I'm not dependent on my spouse, I can make decisions on my own. Good. Let's start with one. That's kind of his gig in this. Assessing family interactions. It overlaps joining with the family. You're trying to find out, get a roadmap together. What are the problems? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? You cannot assess a family or an individual for problems unless you also assess for strengths, because then you have nowhere to go for treatment and intervention. Assessment is integral, it's ongoing. He probably, I think, had some questions that he asked. What part of the system is not functioning? What's going on? Where have we broken down? Where are the communication patterns? Who have we excluded? What is happening? He had an assessment device, family mapping. And it indicates the position of family members one to another. It shows coalitions, affiliations, conflicts, boundaries, how they group themselves, how they see themselves. If you look at page 228, this is a model of some of the symbols for Mnuchin's family mapping. I don't necessarily think that it's in place anywhere anymore unless you find someone who practices structural therapy from a very purist standpoint. But it's there for you to see. Monitoring family dysfunctional sets. 2 structural techniques operate. Boundary making. Where is the greater psychological distance? And if there's too much enmeshment, how do we make distance possible? How do we upset that and realign it?
That's the real work.
Yes, that is the real work. How do we unbalance it? How do we change this hierarchical relationship? How do we get the wife back together with her husband as a parental subset, as a couple subset? How do we get the children back where they belong? He very much believed that children were supposed to be one down. They're being supported, and you can't have a happy family, a functional family, unless there is order. Tracking. What is the family's metaphor? What do they call things? What's important to them? What are the unspoken rules? What are the very clear rules? Some children aren't permitted to close their doors or to have a lock on their doors. Some How do we, and he used the metaphor of doors. Do the parents close their door at night, every night, whether or not they're having sex? Do the parents require the children to knock on the door regardless at any time? Mnuchin used doors as a therapy because doors are the opening metaphor for where our boundaries are and how willing we are to let people in or to keep people out. An enactment, he stages a family conflict. They say, we had a big fight this weekend over my daughter coming in late, breaking curfew to be out with her boyfriend. Then with my husband and I had a big fight after that. He would have them act out. He'd put everybody, get all the facts together. He would put them all together and have them reenact that. And then he would intervene as a therapist while it was going on. Disengaged families need to loosen their boundaries and increase family interaction. And mesh families need to get some boundaries together and differentiate one from the other. Siblings have to work together. If the parents are going to be bound together, he believed the siblings had to be together too. Mnuchin conceived of family pathology resulting from the development of dysfunctional sets. Dysfunctional sets are family reactions that are repeated without modification despite what's going on. Okay? Husband has stress at work, comes home and shouts at his wife. The wife turns around and beats the children. One member of the couple is having an affair. The other member, where you do this, you see families that do the same thing over and over and over. They move out, they move right back in.
Repeated despite what?
Despite the fact that it's not working. You know, what do we do? The same thing. We've been doing this, working the same patterns for 20 years, and we're having the same arguments we've had since day one. Restructuring traditional patterns, or transactional patterns, reframing, changing the original meaning. One of the things that I've seen happen with this is with addicts. And a husband comes in and he says, you know, my wife is nagging me all the time. All she wants to talk about is my drinking. I'm not nearly concerned about the drinking. All she's interested in is checking out where I've been, which bar I'm at, which woman I'm talking to, and how much I'm drinking. And the therapist upsets that by saying, oh, it looks like your wife really loves you. She's really concerned about your health and well-being. May or may not be true, but I think about reframing if the picture's skewed and you put it back on the wall. A different way to perceive it, looking out from the lens of someone outside, like the therapist, into the problem, a new way of looking at the problem. Sometimes structural interventions increase stress for the family system at first, partly because he wanted to show them that the way they handle those kinds of stressors are not working. If it's too rigid, if it's too chaotic, this isn't working. Let's come together and find a different way. He saw children that, particularly young girls that were anorexic, where they'd been told they were too fat, or the mother did not want to see them come into puberty. Father didn't want to see them, they're developing breast. And instead of dealing head on that this child is changing biologically, physiologically, and becoming an adult, you're eating too much, you're too fat, purposely buying clothes that did not fit, that did not acknowledge puberty and the upcoming sexualization. Many of those girls, particularly in that time, we have a much more open sexual society now, but anorexia would develop from that, or binging and purging. Sometimes because of hopelessness and helplessness, I'm under so much control. You know what? There's one thing I can control. I can control what goes in my mouth. I can't control the way you're interacting with me. I can't have autonomy. I can't have my own. And though he saw those kind of psychosomatic illnesses as being a silent cry, a desperate cry for help, and being the identified client that was bringing this dysfunctional family in as a symbolic client into therapy for help. Page 234 gives a case study with step families. This is not a bad theory to adapt into blended families and adopted families. It works pretty well with them, as long as it's not too, because in a blended families, there's always going to be one of the spouses, because we didn't start off together and have these children, right? I've got this whole marriage going on in my head that I'm still kind of aligned to, and these children are here, and they're not yours. And then you've got these people here, and I understand why I'm aligned to mine, but I really can't quite comprehend why you're still aligned to yours. And then to complicate the mix, we've had one of our own. So both sets of children do not feel aligned with each other or with the new baby. So you've got 3 sibling groups going on, and you've got 3 separate spousal, me and my ex-husband, you and your ex-wife, and whoever we're going to be. And then you've got at least 3 parental sets, my children, maybe more, my feeling towards you and your children, my own baby I had with you, and do we have any kind of parental set?
Ex-spouses, grandparents.
Right. So to get in there and figure out where the balance of power is, to upset some of that, where the boundaries are, how rigidly am I keeping your children at bay? How rigidly am I keeping these ex-parents? And they're not ex-parents, they're parents of these children. You know? What's happening? So it's a really good model. It's also a good model for people who adopt children, because you get a 14-year-old child and a 9-year-old child who have lived adult lives and have been put in foster homes and then for adoption, and you go to court and boom, you're a minute-old parent. You didn't get to grow up with your baby and have them at the hospital, and then you go through the stages with them. You are just crowned, by virtue of the judge's order, a parent of these children that you missed 1/3 or 2/3 of their lives, and they've experienced things that you can't relate to. So before, and I would never say to anyone that we should 100% adapt these models from a purist form, because I don't think they work. I don't think one model works with any family, and I don't think some of these older models work with the millennial families that we see now. However, versus throwing them completely out, I think there's ways to adapt them.
With everything.
Right.
Question.
Yes.
How long is an average or normal therapeutic relationship in structural? I know it will depend on the problem. I know it will depend on the size, but individual therapy can be from 6 months to 10 years. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's usually about a year. 6 months to a year.
And structural is in what?
About 6 months to a year.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Because when families have problems, it's unrealistic. Some families will hop out of therapy after a month and tell you they're all fixed. Those are the families sometimes 2 months down the road, they come back to you in parts because they're divorcing. And you're seeing both sides. So, and they might have divorced anyway, and it's not your job to keep them together. But families didn't get to where they are overnight, and it's unrealistic to expect that coming once a week. If they come 6 months, it's only 24 sessions. Some of them have had problems for 12 years before they got to you. You know? All right, guys, thank you so much.
So what would that look like, adapting, like bits and pieces? What would that look like for you?
I wouldn't necessarily maybe do the family map. What I would do is I would assess the boundaries, the power hierarchy. I would look at the roles and rules. I would look at the levels of engagement and disengagement. We have one family right now who both parents are bonded to their daughters from previous marriages. They're both bonded to the child they've had in their marriage, and they both are totally disconnected and scapegoating a 9-year-old child, a son. And a 9-year-old child is early on to be putting someone out of the family. So we're doing a adapted model of that to try to say to them, the boundaries of the family have to be large enough to accept all the members. And this one child is not the problem that you guys are having. You guys are having problems from this marriage and this marriage. You guys are having problems trying to blend these sibling groups together. But you can't pick 3 children and say, you're good and you can stay, and isolate this child and say, you're the demon seed, and if we didn't have you, Think what that does to a child, what message, and all of these seminal models go on communication. They're all based on communication theory. And if I tell you that you are the whole reason that an entire set of different family members, including ex-spouses and ex-siblings, can't live and can't get along, what do I have to do? You have children who suicide, who wind up in crisis stabilization. And when they are run away, and when that's gone, without fail, that same family will take one of these other children that are the good kids, and they will feel, because somebody has to triangulate and be responsible. And so that's what structural does. It tries to figure that out, disrupt it, bring it all to the surface, very much like Freud, bring all the stuff that goes on underneath back up to the surface and say, no, this is not the problem. The problem is we don't know how to communicate, we don't know how to rule and govern, we don't know how to align together properly. Let's start over.